The snow came in sideways that night, a white wall of wind and fury. You could barely see past the porch light, just swirling chaos and the howl of something ancient tearing through the pines.
What did you see?
Somewhere out there, she knew he was out there too. Not her husband, not a neighbor, but a wild soul with silver eyes and trembling limbs, huddled in a storm she wasn't built to survive. Mara, the lynx, small, fragile. A ghost-colored blur with eyes that saw straight into your chest. And she was freezing. Somewhere in that enclosure, alone, Abby Shaw stood with one hand on the doorknob, her other hand gripping a flashlight. Her parka was zipped to her chin. Her boots were lined with hay. Behind her,
Have to leave.
the fire crackled.
Now.
And beside it,
Kitty.
her husband Clay stared at the wall,
Come on.
saying nothing. The silence between them was its own kind of storm. "I have to go," she said. Clay didn't argue. He just nodded once, slowly. He knew there was no stopping her. The wind hit her like a punch. It stole the air from her lungs. Her flashlight beam danced wild and useless, swallowed by the snow. She pushed forward, toward the enclosures behind the cabin, toward the ones who couldn't speak for themselves. And that's where we begin. With a woman walking into a blizzard. Not for herself, not for safety, not even for love, the way most folks would describe it, but for a creature who had once pressed her tiny frost-bitten paw against Abby's chest and trusted her with everything. It wasn't always like this.
This cat wants
Back when the
nothing
days
more
were
than to be
longer
loved.
and the trees greened with summer, Abby and Clay had lived a quieter life in the Bitterroot Valley of western Montana. Not quiet because there was nothing going on. Quiet because the things that did happen weren't loud.
She's okay.
They were tender,
We'll be safe.
slow. The kind of quiet that builds between heartbeats, not between words. They had come here from Michigan nearly 15 years earlier, wanting to live out their 50s with some peace.
Me too.
Abby was an art teacher,
It is so
freshly
peaceful
retired.
out here.
Clay had built custom log furniture most of his life. They bought a stretch of land tucked behind a series of gravel switchbacks, near a creek that sang like wind chimes when the snow melted. They didn't come here planning to build a sanctuary. That part came later. The first one was Jasper. He was barely alive when a ranger brought him in. A tiny bobcat with a shattered hind leg and ribs that jutted like fence posts. The ranger had heard about Abby from a local vet, said she had a healer's way with damaged things. He wasn't wrong. She wrapped Jasper in an old wool blanket and whispered to him while the blizzards passed overhead. For days, he wouldn't eat. Then one morning, as the wind let up, she woke to find his head resting on her foot, eyes open. Trust, thin as thread, had been sewn. Clay built him an enclosure, strong but natural. No cages, just space. They never meant to take in more, but word spread, and hearts like Abby's don't say no to suffering. Not when there's still something that can be done. 6 animals came to live with them over the years. 5 bobcats and 1 oddball lynx named Mara, white as snowfall, with tufted ears and a voice that sounded like grief given shape. They never bred them, never sold photos, never turned it into a show. They just cared, quietly, devotedly. And in that stillness, a family grew. Most days started early. Clay would haul meat from the cold cellar. Abby handled the meds, arthritis pills, digestive enzymes, calming drops for Mara. They moved in a rhythm that didn't need words. Sometimes they'd just sit on the porch and watch the cats play. Sometimes they'd cry when one of them refused food. There were no weekends, no vacations. But they didn't feel like they were missing anything. Then came the letter. It wasn't expected. It wasn't even something they'd asked for. A former colleague of Clay's, now a VP at an engineering firm in Denver, had sent him a job offer. Not just a job, an executive role with a salary big enough to pay off their land, set up their son Jack with a down payment, and take them to a place where the winters didn't try to kill you. You should at least read it, Abby had said, holding the envelope like it might bite. Clay did. Then he read it again. Then he sat in silence for a very long time. "I'm 59, he said finally. "This kind of thing doesn't come twice." Abby didn't respond. She just looked out the window, at Mara pressed up against the glass with her slow, steady blinking. She knew already. What he saw was a way out. What she saw was what they'd leave behind, and the question hung between them like fog over the valley. What do you do when the future calls, but your soul is rooted in the present? They didn't speak about the offer for 2 days. Abby went about her routine like nothing had changed. Morning meds, cleanup, feedings. Clay stacked firewood, repaired a hinge on the gate to Mara's enclosure, and patched the leak in the barn roof. Their bodies stayed busy, but their thoughts circled like hawks. That night, after supper, they sat on the porch like they always did, a quilt over their knees, mugs of hot chamomile in hand. The moonlight turned the snow silver, and Mara was out again, gliding quietly along the fence line, her breath visible in the cold. "She's restless tonight," Clay said. "She senses it," Abby replied. "They all do." Clay didn't answer right away. He watched Mara pause, ears swiveling toward them, her eyes gleaming. "If we left, what would happen to them?" he asked, not looking at Abby. "We both know," she said quietly. It was true. Montana had granted them a special permit years ago under a wildlife rehabilitation clause. But Colorado? Abby had already started researching, and the words she found haunted her. Prohibited. No private ownership. No exemptions for transferred rehabilitated animals. Not even Mara, whose eyes still clouded with anxiety during storms. Not even Rusty and Boone, the two bonded brothers who'd never spent a day apart. They'd have to surrender them. And the system wasn't gentle. Most likely they'd be shuffled through holding facilities, split up, misunderstood. Some might be euthanized quietly, without cruelty, but also without ceremony. Clay set his cup down. "I'm not saying I want to leave," he said. It's a good offer, Abs, one we can't pretend doesn't exist." "I know," she whispered. He stood and kissed the top of her head, then went inside. Abby stayed, watching Mara settle near a tree stump, curling herself into a white knot of fur. The next day, Abby made a call. The man at the Colorado Department of Wildlife spoke like he was reading from a script. Abby explained their situation. The animals' medical needs, their age, the decades of rehabilitation work. She even mentioned Jasper's old collar, now hanging by the door, as proof of the life they'd built around these creatures. But his voice never changed. "Ma'am, the law is clear. No private holding of native wild felines. We don't grant exceptions for incoming rescues, regardless of origin or intent." She hung up, her hand trembling. That night, she cried quietly in the dark, not sobbing, just a slow, leaking ache. Clay tried to comfort her. But they both knew comfort couldn't undo the rules written in distant buildings by people who'd never felt a lynx's heartbeat through a wool blanket. They stopped talking about the job after that. But it never really left the room. It hovered like smoke. Jack called a few nights later. He was in San Diego now, working for a startup, his voice clipped and tired. "Mom, Dad, you guys should think about this seriously. You've done your part. I mean, those animals, they're beautiful, but they're not people. You've given them more than most would. Maybe it's okay to move on. Abby forced a smile into the phone. I hear you, honey. But in her chest, something turned cold. The next week was bitterly quiet. They didn't pack, but they didn't not pack. Clay measured things. Abby folded maps. The animals watched with wary silence. Boone wouldn't eat for a day. Mara chewed through part of a cedar post, something she hadn't done in years. The air felt tight, like the pause before a storm. Then, one evening, the generator blinked out. A cold front was sweeping in from the north, quick and mean. Abby was finishing up meds when a loud metallic clang echoed through the property. Clay looked up from the fire. Probably the wind, he said. But Abby was already moving. That sound wasn't right. She grabbed her parka and flashlight. Outside, the storm had teeth. Snow slashed sideways. The beam from her light was weak and wild, flickering through the storm. She stumbled toward the enclosures, boots sinking, breath ragged. And then she saw it. A chunk of roof peeled back on the main den, metal flapping wildly, snow pouring in. She rushed to the side gate, heart pounding. Inside, 5 cats huddled in the far corner, eyes wide, backs arched. But one was missing. Mara. Abby's voice broke as she screamed her name into the wind. The storm swallowed the sound. She found Mara in the smaller alcove, the one she'd always preferred, tucked behind the main den. It was half covered, the tarp over it torn loose by the wind. Snow had piled in against the far wall. Mara was curled tightly, her white coat dusted in frost, her body trembling so hard it looked like she might break apart. Abby dropped to her knees. Mara, baby, I'm here. The lynx gave a weak, wavering mewl, eyes barely open. Her paw twitched toward Abby's outstretched hand. Not a cry of pain. A call. A reminder. I'm still here. Abby stripped off a glove and pressed her hand to Mara's side. Cold. Too cold. She pulled off her parka, wrapped the cat in it, and held her close. Wind howled through the torn roof above them, battering the metal siding. The storm was worsening, the kind of storm that made national news the next day. And then, a second light appeared beside her, a beam cutting through the whiteout. Clay. He knelt beside them, breath ragged. Jesus, Abs. No more words, no more debate. They moved together, a practiced rhythm. Get the barn tarp. Rope too, she said. He was already running. They battled the blizzard like soldiers, secured the roof with what they had. Canvas, stakes, cinder blocks from the shed. Abby rubbed Mara's limbs between her gloved hands while Clay hauled fresh straw. They rebuilt the den, reinforced the corners, hung heat lamps from extension cords that strained against the dying generator. It took over an hour. When they finally stumbled back inside, soaked to the bone, shaking, their gear dripping onto the wooden floor, they collapsed onto the rug in front of the fire, silence. Only the crackle of burning cedar and the thump of their racing hearts. Abby stared into the flames. Clay watched her. He saw the tremble in her jaw, the tension in her hands. But he also saw something else. Resolve. Not stubbornness, not fear. Something deeper. A tether. She turned to him slowly. I'm staying, she whispered. He said nothing. I can't leave them, Clay. I can't leave her. He rubbed his palms together, the calluses scraping dry against each other. It's not just about them anymore. It's about me, who I am. If I walk away from this, from them, I lose something I won't ever get back. Clay lowered his head. I know. They sat like that for a long while. The fire burned lower. The storm raged on. Finally, he looked up. "We'll figure it out. The job, the money, it's not worth this." He reached out and took her hand. "I'm with you." No celebration, no grand gesture, just a shared look. A decision made not with logic, but with the kind of love that doesn't get written in cards. Later that night, Abby went back out to check on Mara. The lynx was curled beside Boone now, their bodies pressed for warmth. She opened her eyes when Abby approached and let out one soft sound. Not a cry, a thank you. The next morning, Clay made the calls. He turned down the offer. Then he called an attorney in Missoula about converting their operation into a registered nonprofit. They named it Wild Haven Ridge. Not because it was catchy, not because it looked good on paper, but because that's what it had always been. A haven for wild hearts. The early days of Wild Haven Ridge were hard in ways Abby and Clay couldn't have anticipated. Paperwork, permits, budget spreadsheets, all the parts of animal care that didn't involve animals. Clay, always the builder, took to the physical tasks. Expanding enclosures, digging drainage, reinforcing fencing with weatherproof panels. Abby handled the admin side. She taught herself to write grant proposals at night and built a website by trial and error. Their savings dwindled fast. They sold off an old pickup, cut out every luxury. Clay picked up part-time cabinetry work in town. Abby taught art workshops once a month at the local library. But they were never resentful, just tired, purposefully tired. Mara began to heal in ways Abby hadn't seen before. She started seeking out contact. Not just tolerating Abby, but following her, watching her hands, curling beside her boots while she worked. Once, when Abby sat down in the straw to rest her back, Mara climbed into her lap, slow and deliberate, as if asking permission first. Abby didn't breathe for 10 seconds. Then she smiled so hard, it hurt. Boone and Rusty, the bonded brothers, mellowed into old age with grace. They no longer pounced or sprinted. They lounged, side by side, like grumpy old men on a porch. Visitors began to trickle in, not crowds, just the curious and the kind. Wildlife students, veterans, grieving parents. A woman who'd lost her husband and said being near the lynx felt like standing beside something ancient and forgiving. One man drove 4 hours just to stand by Jasper's memorial stone. He'd read about him in a local paper and said he needed to see where someone like that had lived. Abby gave him tea and didn't ask questions. Sometimes the silence of Wild Haven Ridge healed more than the words could. One foggy morning, Abby found a small package at their gate. No return address. Just a note inside that said, "For the white one." It was a blanket, handmade, pale gray with snowflake stitching. Abby brought it to Mara's den, folded it at the corner where she liked to sleep. The lynx sniffed it once, pawed it, then lay down and didn't move for hours. She used that blanket every day for the rest of her life. Jack didn't visit that first year. He was busy. New job, new girlfriend. Something about a product launch in Boston. Abby tried not to take it personally. She left voicemails, sent pictures. He responded, politely, but never at length. "He doesn't get it," Clay said one night. "I don't think he can," Abby replied. "Not yet." They were sitting on the porch, wrapped in that same old quilt, the sound of an owl echoing from the woods. "He sees what we gave up," Clay said, "but not what we got." Abby nodded slowly, then whispered, "It was never about the money or the ease. It was about doing the thing that made us feel whole." Clay reached for her hand. The wind picked up, gentle this time. Just a breath. Down in the enclosure, Mara lifted her head. then slowly, deliberately, closed her eyes and gave them a long, slow blink. Time has a way of folding in on itself when every day follows the same sacred rhythm. Feedings, cleaning, watching, listening. Abby used to mark the days by holidays or birthdays. Now she marked them by paw prints in the snow and the way Mara's coat thickened as autumn deepened. 3 winters passed. Shadow, the eldest bobcat, and the first to arrive after Jasper, passed in his sleep one cold morning. Abby found him curled in his favorite spot beneath the cedar stump, eyes closed, no signs of distress. Just stillness, like a candle that ran out of wax. They buried him beside Jasper, under a tall pine tree overlooking the valley. Abby placed the collar Jasper once wore on a carved stone, and Clay added a hand-carved plaque. He was wild. He was home. Mara sat at the gravesite for hours that day. Refused food, just watched the wind move through the branches. Abby didn't try to coax her, she just sat nearby, both of them quiet. Mourning in parallel. The sanctuary kept going. More animals came, a fox with a broken leg, an owl with one good eye. But Abby's heart never strayed far from the original 6, especially Mara. Clay had built a small clinic shed that spring, a modest structure, big enough for minor procedures and winter shelter. They funded it with help from a retired vet in Helena who had fallen in love with their mission and donated equipment. It was around then that the first big grant came through. A conservation foundation in British Columbia awarded them $25,000 after a student who'd visited the sanctuary submitted a nomination essay. Abby cried when she read it, not because of the money, but because someone had seen them, really seen them. With the grant, they upgraded the fencing, expanded Boone and Rusty's enclosure to include a small stream, and installed motion-activated cameras to study animal behaviors. A local college even asked if they could send students for research internships. People started using the word legacy. But legacy didn't pay the propane bill. There were nights Clay lay awake, running numbers in his head. Fuel costs, feed shipments, liability insurance. Every year got a little tighter. One morning, Abby found him sitting at the kitchen table, papers spread out. "I've been thinking," he said. Abby didn't like that tone. "I'm not saying we leave, but maybe we scale back. Close intake. Just focus on the ones we have. Let the sanctuary age out with us." Abby stared at the steam rising from her coffee. "I can't do that," she said. "I can't treat them like they have an expiration date just because we're tired." Clay sighed, rubbed his temples. "Abs, I'm not trying to stop your heart. I'm trying to save it. You haven't had a break in 5 years. You don't even paint anymore." She flinched like he'd slapped her. It was true. Her easel, once set near the window, now sat folded in the barn. Her brushes hadn't touched canvas since before Mara's rescue. I need to believe it's still growing. That what we're doing still matters." Clay reached across the table, took her hand. "I believe that too. I just don't want to lose you to it." That night, they argued. Not like before, not fire, not fury, but that kind of sad arguing where you both mean well and still end up on opposite ends of the room. The kind where nobody wins. Mara wouldn't go near Abby for 2 days after that. Not out of fear, out of empathy. She could always sense when something in Abby was breaking. On the 3rd day, Abby went into Mara's den, sat cross-legged in the straw, and whispered, "I'm scared." Mara came to her slowly, pressed her forehead to Abby's chest, stayed there. They didn't solve the financial strain, but they remembered why they were here. It wasn't about doing everything. It was about doing the next right thing, one paw print at a time. That winter, As snow covered the trails and frost painted the windows, Abby began painting again. Just a little, just enough to remember how. The storm came in fast. It wasn't the kind that eased in from the west, giving the mountains time to stretch and brace. This one dropped like a hammer. No warning, no buildup. Just an abrupt slam of wind and white that swallowed the world whole. Abby was in the clinic tending to Boone's paw when she felt it shift. The temperature plummeted so sharply it made the wood floor contract with a loud pop. She looked up just in time to see the sky darken, the pines bending. Clay called from the main house. "Power's flickering!" They moved quickly, almost instinctively now. Backup heaters, extra feed. They knew how to ride out winter's worst. But this storm was different. By dusk, the wind had become a roar, flinging branches like toothpicks. Visibility dropped to a few feet. The animals retreated into their dens. Abby made her rounds, checking on each one, whispering comfort through the enclosures. Mara was last. The lynx stood just inside her shelter, ears twitching, eyes wide. Abby gave her a reassuring nod. "We're okay, baby. Just a wild night. Nothing we haven't seen before." She turned to go. That's when she heard it. The sound was unmistakable. Metal shrieking. Not rattling. Tearing. She spun back hard in her throat. A piece of the outer roof on Mara's den was gone, ripped clean away by the wind. Snow poured in sideways. The thermal barrier they'd installed last year was flapping like a broken wing. "Clay!" she screamed, her voice yanked away by the storm. But she didn't wait. She ran, boots crashing through drifts, breath ragged. She slipped once, caught herself. Mara was huddled in the far corner, her blanket soaked, the straw drenched. Her body trembled, eyes glassy. Abby didn't hesitate. She stepped inside, knelt, and gathered the lynx in her arms. "No, no, no, you're okay. I got you." Mara let out a sound. Soft, cracked, more breath than voice. Not fear, not pain, recognition. Clay arrived seconds later, face pale, arms loaded with tools and a tarp. They didn't speak, just moved. They'd done this before. Not like this. Not this bad. But the muscle memory took over. Abby wrapped Mara in the old wool blanket, the one they'd kept just in case. Clay anchored the new tarp across the roof while the storm tried to rip it from his hands. Ropes, nails, straw, bricks against the wind. Their fingers were numb, soaked through. Abby's cheeks burned from the cold. Her lungs ached, but they didn't stop. Not until the den was sealed, warm, safe. Not until Mara had stopped shaking. Back inside, they stripped off their wet clothes, dropped them in a heap by the fire, and collapsed. For a long time, they said nothing. Then Clay whispered, almost to himself, "If we'd taken that job, if we'd moved." Abby nodded slowly. She'd be gone. All of them might be. The thought crushed her chest. Not just the loss, the silence it would leave behind. Clay looked at her, really looked, as if seeing her for the first time in months. "We saved her tonight. You did." Abby didn't answer. She just closed her eyes and let the warmth from the fire crawl into her bones. In that silence, something settled between them, not a resolution, not a fix, just a knowing. They weren't leaving. Not now. Not ever. And somewhere out in the dark, Mara blinked slowly, her body finally still, her breath matching the rhythm of the wind. The morning after the storm, the sky opened up like nothing had happened. Clear, crisp, and so bright it hurt to look at. Sunlight glinted off every branch and rooftop. turning the world into a frozen cathedral. Abby stepped out onto the porch, a mug of coffee warming her palms, and just stood there, breathing, listening, watching. There, in the snow, were fresh tracks. 5 sets, meandering, and one smaller path, the familiar wide-pawed gait of a lynx, walking slowly, deliberately, across the frost-bitten yard. Mara was okay. Clay joined her with a second mug. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. They stood shoulder to shoulder, wrapped in silence and wool. That afternoon, they began making phone calls. Clay called the Denver firm. The HR director was surprised, then disappointed, then respectful. It's rare to hear someone turn down this kind of package for personal reasons, she said. Clay only replied, "It's not just personal, it's everything." Abby contacted the state to finalize the sanctuary's nonprofit designation. Wildhaven Ridge became official, paperwork, EIN number, even a basic logo drawn by a volunteer graphic designer who'd once been one of her art students. They printed business cards, simple ones, not for clout, just to show people they weren't giving up. News of the storm spread. A local newspaper ran a story after hearing about how the couple saved the animals in the middle of the blizzard. A photographer came out, took a shot of Mara with Abby beside her, both looking toward the horizon. The image went semi-viral. Donations trickled in, then poured. A small conservation group in Alberta reached out with a partnership offer. Another sanctuary in Oregon offered to send volunteers for heavy labor seasons. And then came the letter, handwritten. No return address. You don't know me, but I've followed your journey for years. What you've done, what you chose, is rare. Please use this for whatever Wildhaven needs. Inside was a check, 5 digits. Abby cried for an hour. They didn't use it for new buildings or upgrades. They used it to pay off their propane debt, restock the winter feed reserves, and fix the leaking pipes under the east enclosure. And they gave every single animal a new toy or bed, even the old ones. Boone's was a canvas tunnel. He spent an entire afternoon just sitting halfway inside it, peeking out like a child playing hide-and-seek. Mara's was a thick, wool-lined hideaway den with a soft interior floor. She dragged her old blanket inside and didn't come out for 3 days. Not in fear, in peace. The seasons rolled forward. Shadow was gone. So was Willow. Rusty grew stiff in the mornings. Boone slowed but still made it to the gate every time Abby brought food. Mara? She aged differently, quietly, almost reverently. Abby swore she had more silver in her coat than white now, but she still blinked the same way. Slow, deliberate, trusting. Years later, just as the valley began to turn gold again, their son Jack called. "Hey, Mom, is it okay if I come up for a bit? Just a few days." Abby blinked. "Of course, sweetheart. We'd love that." She didn't ask why. When he arrived, he was older, wearier. Suit jacket slung over his shoulder, phone always vibrating. But his eyes lingered longer than before, on the trees, the trails, the animals. That night, the 3 of them sat on the porch. Mara lay curled just inside the enclosure, her face turned toward them, her ears flicking as Jack spoke. "I gave my notice," he said. Clay raised an eyebrow. "At the firm?" Jack nodded. "I thought that world would make me happy. It didn't. It just made me tired. I kept thinking about this place, about you two, about what you gave up." He looked at Mara, then back to them. "And I realized, you didn't give anything up. You gained something I never understood. Not until now." Abby's heart caught in her throat. Jack leaned forward. I want to help. I want to learn. I don't want this place to end with you. The wind stirred, gentle, familiar, and somewhere behind them, Mara blinked once, slow, solemn, as if she understood exactly what had just happened. The sun had just dipped behind the hills, casting long violet shadows across the field, when Jack stepped into the enclosure for the first time without hesitation. He wore work boots, not loafers. A canvas jacket, not a blazer. His phone was off. Abby watched him from the porch, arms folded, her heart caught somewhere between disbelief and wonder. Mara approached him slowly, cautiously. She wasn't young anymore. Her steps were careful, deliberate. Jack crouched down, one knee in the straw, and extended a gloved hand. She sniffed it. Then she blinked, slowly, deeply, and pressed her forehead to his knuckles. Abby gasped. Clay stepped beside her. She knows, he said. She always knew. That night, they didn't have a grand celebration. No party, no speeches, just dinner, leftover stew and fresh bread. Jack helped wash the dishes. Clay tuned the old radio until it found a station playing blues. Mara lay just beyond the porch fence, curled in her den, her breath visible in the cool air. It's strange, Jack said softly. I used to think success looked like numbers, bonuses, people answering your calls on the first ring. He paused. But now, I think it looks like this. He gestured to the silence, the sky, the warmth inside the little home built with years of love and stubbornness. Abby placed a hand on his. It's okay. It took you time to see it. Some of us are just slower blinks. They laughed. A quiet, shared laugh. Not loud, not dramatic, but full, real. The next morning, Jack started work. He didn't know how to muck stalls properly, didn't know which meds went with which vial. But Abby taught him. Clay guided him. And Mara followed him. Not constantly, not like a dog, but with presence, with intent, as if silently reminding him what mattered. The sanctuary didn't become famous. It didn't explode on social media. There were no documentaries made, but it endured. Through late springs and early snows. Through aches in joints and quiet goodbyes to old friends. Through the quiet wonder of birth and the sacred weight of passing. And when, many years later, Mara's time came, she didn't hide. She walked, slowly, without fear, out to the pine clearing where Jasper and Shadow and Willow rested. She lay down, rested her head on the same old wool blanket Abby had once wrapped her in, and closed her eyes. Jack found her there at dawn. He didn't cry right away. He sat beside her, hand on her flank, listening to the birds. Abby and Clay joined him, and together they watched the sunrise. No words, just breath and stillness and peace. They buried her beneath the tallest pine, next to the others. No plaque, just a flat stone with her paw print pressed into it, sealed in clay, placed by Jack's hands. The next day, he began designing a new welcome sign for the sanctuary. It read, Wild Haven Ridge, a home for those with nowhere else, founded on trust, built with love, continued by choice. And just below that, etched into the wood, a slow blink means forever.